What is going on, guys? It's the Mad Dragon. So, the Autumn Nations Cup is now over, and we were treated to one hell of a final between the World Cup England team and a France team with less caps between them than Owen Farrell on his own, which is just ridiculous. A game so one-sided and build-up that everyone thought it was going to go one way. England playing at home in front of their own crowd, with a team full of players deserving of playing in a World Cup final against such an inexperienced and experimental France team. We all assumed England were not only going to win by 20 to 30 points, but were so much favourites that betting sites that I saw even had odds on for England to win without France scoring a single point. And yet, in beautiful international rugby union fashion, we were treated to not just a great game of rugby, not just the most intense game of the tournament, in my opinion, but had it only been one missed kick or extra penalty away, it might have been one of the biggest upsets in Northern Hemisphere rugby since probably Italy beat Wales in 2007, and could have been compared to an underdog story of Argentina beating New Zealand in the Tri-Nations Cup a few weeks ago, or even Japan beating South Africa back in 2015. There were some big discrepancies in this match though, and this match for me was almost the perfect display of both the best and the worst things that rugby union has to offer at this current point in time. This is going to be a very different video for me, and I'll be taking a much more analytical look and reviewing the game that has already happened, as opposed to the normal preview videos I do in predicting how a game will go based on my knowledge of international rugby, and also looking at the teams that are normally going to play. Instead, I'll be looking backwards at a game, so it's going to be a bit of a different avenue for me in this one. That being said, I would like to head a few things off before getting into this video so you can decide if it's the sort of video that you think you'll be interested in. In this video, I'll be reviewing the game, looking at many aspects, including both teams, the players on the teams, the positives, the negatives brought to the game by both sides, the style of rugby that was played, the refereeing, officiating the game, including some of the TMO and assistant referee decisions, and finally a reflection of this game on world rugby as a whole, and whether it's actually a positive or a negative thing. With that in mind, I understand a lot of people have very strong views about rugby, especially when it comes to people talking negatively about their favourite player or their team they support. Please be aware in this video I will be pointing out all sorts of negatives in this game. If you disagree with some of the points, you are perfectly within your rights. But if you know you're the sort of person that can be triggered or get super angry when someone mentions something negative about your favourite player or one of the teams you support, I would recommend this video may not be the best video for you. There are some great reviews out there on YouTube looking at this game that look at a much more general view of the game and their impressions that may be more suited to your entertainment. This video is aimed to break down different aspects of the game from an unbiased viewer and looking at the things that were so brilliant and yet so tragic in this game. And hopefully the people that get the most out of this video will be people who enjoy the game theory in rugby and appreciation of the sport as a whole and want to see an improvement in the sport, or even just those who want a rugby podcast style video in the background to help broaden their knowledge on some things they may have missed with the game as it was happening live, or even just to have a bit of a conversation from someone else's perspective to give you a different view on the game as a whole from how you might have seen it when you were watching it. With that out of the way, hopefully everyone left watching would like to look more analytically at this game and will be entertained and maybe even learn something about rugby. So the best way to start this sort of video is first of all to provide my background in this game, who I wanted to win, who I thought would win, why does my opinion matter. I know not everyone will care too much about my personal stake in the game, and for those people I will put a timestamp on the screen for you guys right now so you can jump ahead of it in order to get straight into the first part of this review. I'm looking forward to doing this sort of style of video, not just because I'm a big fan of rugby, but also to learn some new skills in reviewing sport and media, and it may even allow me to expand to reviewing other things in the future. This is a learning curve for me, and constructive criticism in the comments about how I could improve my reviews is definitely appreciated. That being said, I am a small YouTuber, I have no budget, and I'm working with limited resources, so don't expect to be seeing this series on Amazon Prime anytime soon. I'm going to do a bit of a series, bit of a podcast style potentially, covering different elements of the game in each video, and some graphics on screen for your viewing pleasure. But if you enjoy this style of review, even if you just have me on in the background because you enjoy rugby talks and you want to listen to something during work, consider hitting that subscribe button. I have no idea how many parts this series will be, so there might be quite a few videos for you guys to keep track of. So some questions I feel I should field straight from the off to give you guys a better insight into my thoughts on the game in a very general sense before we dive deeper, as I'm sure this will give some context on my views of the game. So first off, who did I think was going to win? 100% England. They were absolute favourites going into this game, and the game France had against Italy didn't really leave me believing they'd be able to put up much of a fight against how strong this England team had been looking leading up to this game. Who did I want to win? I actually wanted both teams to win for very different reasons. I will explain later in the video what I mean by that, because it doesn't really mean anything, but I'll try and clarify that later in the video. Who do you think would win if they played again tomorrow? To be honest with this one, I think England. I think France played an incredible game and gave 100% effort, but I think if the same teams played again tomorrow, I don't think France would be able to put up quite the same performance, and I'm sure Owen Farrell probably wouldn't miss as many kicks and probably would be a more likely England win in the game they had, especially with knowing game plans and stuff that France might bring to that one. And finally, who do I think deserved to win now that the game is all over? And in all honesty, I believe France absolutely deserved to win this game. To me, they played better rugby on the whole, and they were in the lead right up until the end. I don't think they should have had the game taken away from them. Poor decisions across the board from allowing England to come back in. I feel a more experienced team probably could have stopped England from coming back into that game and probably should have won within the 80 minutes. But sadly, I think inexperience just came through, along with some questionable decisions coming from the various refereeing staff involved in this game. So I'm really looking forward to talking about that a little bit more. But hopefully this clarifies some answers you might be wondering about during the video, and it will give you a bit of context into my view on the game. So for those of you who are still with me, a bit about the Mad Dragon coming into this game. I had the unusual ability of being able to view this game as an impartial watcher. I had two external avenues affecting my viewing of this game. One was a fantasy league my friends and I were involved in, and I was in contention to win quite comfortably. Although there's no monetary value involved, the bragging rights between friends on who is the most knowledgeable on a sport we all love is payment enough. And I actually dropped all of my French players in the fantasy league and sided as many English players as the game would allow, as before this match kicked off I truly believed England were just going to steamroll this immensely inexperienced French side. If England perform well, I have the chance to win the fantasy league. Conversely, before the tournament started and before I found out about the French leagues ruling players out and that they weren't going to be allowed to play all of their international games this year, I'd actually put a bet on France to win this tournament outright, and even did a breakdown video on the channel on why I thought they would win. The payout for France to win this game, if they'd actually been able to beat England, means that I actually would have won just over £400 on my bet. So whoever won, I myself would end up winning in some way. I would either win a fantasy league and have bragging rights, or I would end up with a bunch of money and being able to celebrate a great game in style. Incidentally, the England players played pretty poorly that I picked, but ultimately they did manage to beat France, meaning I not only lost the fantasy league, but I also didn't win any money. Life sucks, we move on. But what it did mean is that I came into this game impartial and almost rooting for both sides to win, which is an unusual situation for anyone who is an avid watcher of the sport. But it meant that I got to enjoy the game from so many angles. How close it was, the David versus Goliath story involved, in the sheer determination of neither team to give in. And this game did not disappoint. Coming into this game, England were heavy favourites, and rightfully so. Six Nations champions, basically uncontested in this Autumn Nations Cup, and fielding a side worthy of playing in the World Cup. In fact, 13 of the starting 15 actually were in the World Cup final, against a team of French players who between them held only 68 caps, 30 of which come from Dulin at fullback, which meant 38 caps across the other 14 players in the starting 15, which is just ridiculous. The odds on for this game before it kicked off that I saw was England were actually favoured 1-3, and France had a chance to win this game at 6-1. Everyone who I spoke to all agreed it would be a France demolishing, and was interested to see how both teams would even be able to approach this game. I wasn't surprised by England's game plan for this game. Coming up against a brand new France side with no way of knowing how France were going to play, Eddie Jones had to create a game plan suited to England's playstyle and just basically take over control and dictate the game, knowing France were going to break and falter at some point. England, with no idea what France would throw at them, instead decided to create a game plan that at this point should just be coined as old familiar for English rugby. This is England's plan A, and on so many occasions they use this game plan when they aren't certain how to play a specific team. The game plan breaks down to three fundamentals: territory, possession and penalties. In effect, England actually spent very little time with the ball, implementing as many top-class ball-from-hand kickers, coupled with the fitness and technical ability of some truly standout players with a high work rate they do have in this English side. The kickers in every possession are designed to move England further up the field. In this game, they specifically had Ben Youngs, George Ford, Owen Farrell, Henry Slade, Elliot Daly, and even to an extent Johnny May, who are all proven kickers for very different reasons. Having 6 key kickers on the pitch meant not only are your exits solid when you're stuck in your own 22, but you also have multiple people who can keep peppering kicks down into the opposition's half, forcing them to choose whether to play out or run 100 metres up the pitch, or they can kick it back to you and you regain possession. And with 6 strong kickers, 3 of who are great counter-attack runners and 3 of which are great backfield experienced players, if that kick does come back to you, you no longer have to worry about rotations of kickers to put men on side. Everyone knows how to play that backfield, as well as knowing they are all equally capable of continuing the kicking tennis or counter running and making meters themselves. We have seen England implement this tactic multiple times in recent years, and it removes pressure from your players and also pins your opponent back in their 22. They either kick you back the ball and you attack closer and closer to the try line, or they attempt a counter attack and run into the second prong of Eddie Jones's plan. By counter running against England, you play a very dangerous game with players at the skill level of Maro Itoje, Tom Curry and Sam Underhill, and to be honest, most of the forwards in this England team, it is very hard to gain any momentum against them unless you are a great side yourself. England tend to set up 2-man attacking pods, normally including a big tackler such as Vunipola or George Cruz, initiating the tackle while having technical jackers such as Curry or Underhill watch the tackle. Their job is not to put the man on the ground, it's not even to win the ball, it is about attacking the ball and showing the ref the other player is cheating and getting you a penalty. These 2 prongs mixed with a third of Eddie Jones's prep, that is fitness. England are by far one of the fittest and best drilled teams in the blitz defence, probably in international rugby as a whole, being only mirrored by the likes of teams maybe like New Zealand. The speed and fitness of these players mixed with the technical ability of others makes playing out of your half incredibly tough. So teams are left either pinned in their own 22, getting turnover and conceding penalties, or you kick back to England, allowing them possession and allowing them the ability to attack and score a try. Either way, it is a win-win for England. The best analogy I could come up with for this game plan, for maybe some new viewers to rugby, is England basically play like a bowl of soup. A lot of ingredients are needed to make it. It is able to sustain you no matter what. It is unquestionably the most efficient system. It's very simple to do, but if you were to see it every day, it is downright boring. Eddie Jones is a very safe coach. He basically comes up with a game plan that's very safe and simple and will get the best results. I assume he's the sort of person that would give an abacus for Christmas just to work out the mathematical odds of what's most likely to succeed for him, rather than trying to create actual interesting and exciting running rugby. Eddie Jones is arguably one of the best coaches in world rugby and can produce an outstanding team capable of brilliant feats, as we all remember when Japan beat South Africa in that 2015 World Cup match. I won't go on too much about Eddie Jones himself. If you want to see a good video about why he's so good at what he does, I recommend watching Squidge Rugby's video about Japan preparing the Brighton Miracle. I will check the link down in the description if you guys want to check that out and learn a little bit more about Eddie Jones. I found it a very, very insightful video. But Eddie Jones to me is very well educated in the world of rugby, creating a game plan for each game specifically that utilises the rules of rugby to the letter without exceeding them. And to me, you could even claim actually abuses the use of the rules to generate wins. And at the end of the day, that's all Eddie Jones cares about. A win is a win, and that's all we will remember in the history books. Eddie Jones has been well known for the use of the phrase, "that wasn't rugby."
They took the game to the nth degree today, and it wasn't rugby. So
it wasn't a game of rugby. We still haven't played a game.
Like, it's hard when you don't play rugby, you know. It's
because there wasn't any rugby today. I'm not critical of our side at all because we didn't play rugby. It ceased to be a game of rugby, and we practiced for a game of rugby all week, and we didn't get it.
Because you're not playing rugby anymore.
But if that's rugby, then I'm going to retire. That's not rugby.
He says it throughout his whole career. Normally when a team comes up with a game plan that shows his up, most notable was England versus Italy back in 2017, now coined Ruckgate, where Italy basically found a way to abuse the breakdown rules in a ruck, meaning the ruck never actually formed, making them no offside line and allowing players to get all the way around the back of a ruck where there wasn't one and no one was offside. It made for one of the oddest and most memorable games in recent history in terms of international rugby, and a way of using the rules of rugby purely for your advantage as a team. To me, as much as that was infuriating for Eddie Jones, that game is actually what led to the current England international game. Eddie Jones stated after that game, that wasn't rugby, which isn't actually true. It was, in fact, exact rugby to the letter of the law. Eddie Jones has now taken this concept to a whole new level, creating game plans in a team around this is exact rugby, using a game plan so stringent on the rules of rugby that referees have no options but to favour England and constantly blow the whistle for a penalty. They do everything right. So right it's undeniable, and that's why they are one of the best teams in the world. And why bother trying to score tries when you can have continuous penalty and a kicker with an 83% kicking success rate? With all that combined, Eddie Jones basically came up with a game plan where he knew he wasn't going to play France head on. He was basically going to try and win as many penalties as he can, allowing his kicker to generate those 3 points over and over and over again. If the kick was going to be in a difficult position, you basically just kick the ball into the 22, get your line out, and every single time, as England love to do, try and set up a maul. Mauls are a very overpowered thing in rugby, and there haven't really been too many rules generated about how to stop a maul. Basically, the only way to stop a driving maul from that 5 metre line is you either drop the maul and give the team another penalty, or sometimes even a penalty try at that point, or you give them a penalty in a much better position, allowing them to get an extra 3 points, or you just have to be a ferocious team able to drive a maul out into touch, which very rarely happens. I'd say 9 out of 10 mauls from 5 metres probably end up in a try one way or another, or at least a penalty. That is the Eddie Jones game plan. Take your threes when you can get them, and if you're in an awkward position, try and get that try by basically using the most overpowered move in rugby. As for France, no one knew what the French were going to offer this game, but it was summed at best pre-match when I heard the line, they are not the most experienced players, but they have the most experienced coaches. And isn't that the truth? Before this game, I expected France to come into this and play like a barbarian squad, throw the ball around, offload all the time, do a bicycle kick if you want to, and it would just be fun for about 20 minutes until the organisation and professionalism of a well-driven England team began to break down that line and just pummel a team of youngsters into the ground. But it wasn't to be. We already got to see earlier this year just how devastating a well-drilled French team can be, winning 4 of their 5 Six Nations matches, losing only to Scotland in what felt like a game that France didn't feel like playing. I think arguably France deserved to win that Six Nations, but let themselves down. As a friend said to me recently, all the French players look like they don't really want to be there. And it's true. They all seem to look relatively mopely and wander around like they're wondering what they're going to have for tea later after the game's over. But this isn't the normal French team. This is a youth team comprising of 38 caps and Dulin. And they wanted to be there. Fabien Galthié came into the squad in 2020 looking to rejuvenise a disparaged France squad after being knocked out of the World Cup in the quarterfinals by Wales. With 4 years before they host their own World Cup, France have a very, very long way to go to create a World Cup winning team. And he was set to make some noise in this game. A team of youngsters with nothing to lose, many of whom took part in the Under-20s Championship win for France, all of whom are going to be wanting to earn a place in the coming year's Six Nations. Galthié also had another ace up his sleeve in a man that goes by the name of Shaun Edwards. Shaun Edwards, in my opinion, is one of the best, if not the best, defence coaches in the world, having seen an incredible improvement in the Wales international defence in recent years, only for a terrible negotiator to offer him an insulting contract that saw Shaun Edwards leave the club and immediately snaffled up by France, to which Wales is now feeling the effects. For anyone that has watched any of the Wales rugby recently, you will know what damaging effect has happened to the Wales defensive line after seeing Shaun Edwards go. Why you wouldn't offer that man the most money you could possibly give someone, I don't know, but they chose not to, and now France get to reap the benefits of having him. God knows what Shaun Edwards says to the players that makes them do so great, but boy does he get results. The pressure this young team had put on them from the England attack was exceptionally well defended, to a degree not even the biggest England fan couldn't dispute. This was one of the best defensive performances this year, maybe in recent years in terms of French defence. With the French defence set and they knew they could hold up against an English barrage, the game plan became about attack. In a superb coaching setup, the game plan was executed. Galtier was able to recognise the English game plan and went about creating counters for each area of the English game plan. Instead of pick and goes and just hoping to break the line, France clinically picked targets for their runs. Whereas the English two-man pod defence relies on a big tackler with a jackler waiting on the wings, every carry France would make instead being designed to target straight at the jackler and instead make the jackler become the tackler, running directly at players like Curry, Itoje and Underhill and forcing the tackle, making players like Cruz and Vunipola offered nothing more than wait in a counter-ruck rather than having the technical ability to get over and steal the ball or earn a penalty. This would allow France to move up the field and allow big ball carriers to find gaps. And once France had been able to find these gaps, they were basically relying on the youth of the individuals, hoping that the individual work made by these players could create some scoring opportunities, or at very least being able to earn themselves penalties in the English half and allowing some superb kicking actually from some of the French fly halves, allowing them to not allow England to create that big damaging lead that would damage morale. And overall, I think this French game plan worked pretty successfully. To me, France actually came into this game with the advantage in terms of a game plan. They knew how England would be forced to play due to not knowing anything about the French squad, and rather than creating their own game plan and hoped it just worked better, they instead created a counter plan that would undo Eddie Jones's soup. With the game plan set, we can have the game kick off, and what a treat this first half had in store for us. Right from the kickoff, France were out to lay down their intent for the game. The meta for rugby tends to be kick the ball deep from the kickoff and one or two fast players chasing it down to apply pressure on the catcher and hopefully getting a tackle, and the opponents will then have to either box kick or have to pass to a kicker to clear their lines. Normally this kicking ends up being about between the 22 and the halfway line, so ultimately within the first 30 seconds of the game you have recovered the ball from the opponent in their own half and you get to begin the attack. To a new viewer of rugby, you may be thinking receiving the kickoff is the best position, whereas in fact modern rugby actually puts you on the back foot. Most tier 1 nations have a good enough defensive line that you cannot play out of your own half, and 95% of the time you will find the team kicking to safety, ultimately putting the opponents in the driving seat, and you will have to play defensively for the next 5 minutes or so of the game until you can hopefully turn over the ball or win a penalty. England, expecting the meta, create wide spaces between players and don't even set up lifting pods. They believe France are going to kick deep and therefore aren't even going to try and contest. All of the English backs are in position to receive and kick back downfield, but like a game of Yu-Gi-Oh, France have a counter to the counter and instead target the weakest long-range kicker in the back line, Anthony Watson. Jalibert kicks high and specifically ensures Watson receives the ball, with the fastest Frenchman on the field, Villiers, chasing down to apply pressure and Woki there to try and support him. Watson braces for the tackle and England forwards get behind him to try and ruck over the ball, but the ruck never actually happens. Villiers is an ex-Sevens player who's immensely fast and immensely strong and manages to get underneath him and holds him in place until Woki and Dante can apply the power game and actually manage to drag Watson into touch. We are 12 seconds into the game. France have already taken England by surprise and are already on the front foot. France are here to play. England do manage to turn the ball over in the preceding maul from the line out, but all the pressure is provided from France. France claim it back and begin the first of a number of kicks from Jalibert, pinning England back in their 22. Kicking your opponents backwards happens so much in this game, and while England definitely have the advantage in the ability of the kickers, Jalibert actually does a relatively good job throughout this match managing to try and kick England back into their own half. Elliot Daly, of course, fields these every single day with relative ease, but what they are not ready for is the sheer brilliance of the clean-out, turning a standard England exit strategy into a chaotic defensive mess. This is brilliant aggression from a young French team and show off the way to play England. England win by playing a game at their pace and dictating everything that happens. They never play teams that offer counter-aggression. That means they have to make rushed decisions. France turn it over only for the scrum half Kuyu to perform a terrible grubber kick along the floor. This is a sign of just inexperience. He is probably now the 4th choice scrum half for France that they actually have, and I truly believe that this was Serin or Dupont. I believe this grubber kick gets right into the corner in that 5-metre line, or even a kick over the top for Raka to chase could have even led to a try, but neither was performed by the inexperienced scrum half, and it allows Johnny May to clear his lines. Very well done actually from Johnny May. There was a brilliant kick to free up all of his players. This is a poor decision by France, and they let England off after huge pressure has been applied, when realistically they should absolutely have been looking to just go through the phases and see if they could even work this into a try-scoring situation. France attempt to regain their attack, and this is where we get to see the first of what will turn into the main theme in this series, the sheer lacking in correct, or to that extent even seeing, penalties. The first half was by far the best for the referees, but it cannot absolve them for how sheer poor quality the calls were in this game. I've watched this game 4 times now, and in the first half I cannot find a single call that comes from the assistant referees Frank Murphy and Craig Evans. Not one. Why neither touch judge, who are also highly trained and high-standing referees, are able to notice a clear penalty on the field, God only knows. Anyway, back to the game. So at the 2.5-minute marker, we get to see the first penalty. Anthony Watson performing a high tackle on Woki, hitting him on the shoulder and sliding up to around the neck and head. For context, in the Argentina versus Australia game that happened in the Tri-Nations Cup, 2 players were yellow carded for the same style tackle in that game. This is not even a penalty in this game. And look where the assistant referee is in this. Why are you not flagging this? And for anyone thinking it's just because the player is on his way down, wait till later in this match. It gets much, much worse. So the non-penalty isn't given. England recover professionally, and next few minutes is just England pinning France back in their 22. England are back to plan A. All of this kicking backwards and forwards leads eventually to a French line-out, where I will now point out a big issue in World Rugby. As the line-out is formed, England begin to close the gap to apply pressure on the French line-out, which obviously you aren't allowed to do. Andrew Brace correctly blowing his whistle and moves them back, only for England to do it again, to no sanction. Just watch the number of steps they take after being warned by the ref. Without looking literally frame by frame through this, I can count 15 or 16 small steps taken by England to close this line out. Why do neither the referee nor the assistant ref call this out? I want to clarify this isn't aimed at England in particular. So many teams do this in rugby, but for some reasons refs don't interject. If you award a penalty or free kick here in the first 5 minutes of a game, they won't do it again. Instead, what you do is create a theme, meaning England are allowed to cheat without being penalised. And whilst this is only a small thing 5 minutes into a game, if this repeats itself throughout the game, we begin to see this snowball and referees just lose control of the game. One of the best referees I've seen this year has definitely been Paul Williams, reffing in the Southern Hemisphere and doesn't allow teams to get away with anything. If you haven't already, go and watch the quality of rugby this year in Southern Hemisphere rugby. The games are brilliant to watch because strong referees don't get pushed around by the bigger teams and even penalise players directly for shouting at them. Sadly, in the Northern Hemisphere, we don't get this, and it's such a shame to me. This line-out leads to a knock-on and subsequently 2 minutes of scrum resetting, which is so sad to see in the modern games. Scrums aren't solid on the international stage. And of course, this is the game plan. England win an easy penalty. They are better scrummagers. They were always going to be able to dominate this French scrum, and it was always going to happen. It's an easy penalty, easily in front of the post, easy kick for Farrell. England go 3-0 up. France regained some composure and returned the kickoff and switched back to Galtier's original plan, targeting jacklers. The kickoff going straight to Curry and even subsequent runs being directed straight at Curry. He does well to handle himself. Tom Curry is a world-class player and has definitely proven himself as an overall generally brilliant player in terms of tackling, defensive work, offensive work and turnovers. He is the main player to target, and that's why France are playing so hard. But the overall fact is that France are on the offensive again. The inexperience does kick back in, however. The attack doesn't lead to too much. There was some good working up and down the pitch, but overall France are just too slow in their ability to get it to the wing, in my opinion. Missing good opportunities for 2-on-1s if the ball could just get wider a little bit quicker, and England cover very effectively. What we do see in this, though, is the beginning of the ref beatdown, performed so cleverly by England. In the series of play, we see Kyle Sinclair running offside in the middle of a ruck, screaming to the ref that the ball is out. This will happen a lot throughout this game, and in the second half, the ref actually tells England players to stop shouting at him, but ultimately does nothing about it. But what it does do is put doubt in the referee's mind. Maybe he's missed something, maybe he's made a mistake. We see it a lot, especially from Tier 1 nations, and I think it's something World Rugby needs to shut down. Asking the ref, is the ball available, is one thing, but in this game, statements are just made directly shouting at the ref, it is out. If you think it's out, you should go for it and suffer a penalty if it's not, or wait for the ref to say ball out. And I think referees need to give penalties against players who repeatedly shout and just scream directly at the refs in the game. On the subject of penalties, how can Kyle Sinclair possibly stand here and the referee not penalise him for being offside? He's already told Sinclair the ball wasn't out, meaning it is a ruck. Sinclair is at least 2 metres offside, in front of the ref, involved in a conversation with the ref, and almost playing the ball in front of the 9. This is a penalty, but the ref for some reason lets this go because he didn't pick up the ball. Sinclair made the correct call in not touching the ball, absolutely, but that doesn't stop him from being offside. This isn't the only time this happens either. Later in the game, he does the exact same thing, screaming it's out directly at the ref.
Kyle Sinclair alongside him.
Running onside, and the ref even points his arm out to say hold. The commentators even made fun of him, saying Sinclair is making a statement to the ref rather than asking a question. Why is this not a penalty for an offside? Why is there no penalty for shouting at the ref? Why do the touch judges not penalise him? How is this match officiating at Tier 1 rugby? And sadly, folks, the pain doesn't end here. We move on to France's attack, still pressing forward, when a penalty is given away by Guirassy, entering at the side of a ruck, a correct call, and an easy let-off for England. Now, something I'd like to mention here is something that I've seen a lot in Tier 1 rugby, and when it comes to a David versus Goliath style game, consistency in a game is one of the key aspects from a referee in dictating a fair game. But one thing I have noticed in the past is referees unintentionally favouring the better team on paper. New Zealand have been the kings of this for the longest time, and if you go back 2 or 3 years and watch the New Zealand games, you will see consistently that New Zealand are led off from penalties that the other team incur themselves at some point during the game for the identical situation. While you can blame teams for this, referees should certainly be trying to counterbalance each other when one team is meant to be better than the other. There is a subliminal angle to this. If a team is better, it's less likely they actually made a mistake. New Zealand were number 1 in the world for the longest time, and now England have been promoted to basically being a static number 2 in the world underneath South Africa. Currently, that's mainly because South Africa haven't been able to play a lot of games and potentially lose a game this year, but overall probably deserve to be in that spot given their performances so far this year. But I think England have also been promoted to this stature of that if something goes wrong, referees tend to believe it was the other team's fault, as they are playing the better team. And why would the better team give away a penalty? That being said, let's look at this in at the side penalty from Guirassy. It's absolutely correct. He goes in at about a 45-degree angle, clears the man out, and he ends up horizontal to the ruck. Clear penalty. Now, if we go forwards 15 minutes to Jamie George, let's quickly watch this run through. Did you see it? Jamie George joins this ruck in front of the referee at the same 45-degree angle as Guirassy did, and ends up horizontal to the ruck, in fact lying on top of the ruck. This is not given as a penalty. This inconsistency can be so painful to watch, especially in a close game such as this one, and I think it's something World Rugby seriously need to be pushing in TMOs, to look at things that refs aren't seeing in a better team, even if they're committing the same foul. We'll move forward to the next penalty, which is probably going to be the consistent theme through these episodes, just talking about how poor the officiating was. England's line-out is stolen by Woki in the air, but subsequently draws a penalty. A slightly ridiculous rule that you're not allowed to touch hands in the line-out, which, considering you're throwing 2 gigantic men in the air at the same time, they're not allowed to touch, to me is a bit of a ridiculous rule, but what are you going to do? Those are the current rules. You can't touch the man in the air. Farrell is going to step up and take this penalty kick, and this is where, for me, the main downfall came in Eddie Jones's plan. Farrell is a kicker with an 83% success rate at this point, and what happens next when Farrell misses this kick is such a devastating blow to this team. And when this is a relatively easy kick by his standards is missed, it really displays how rocked England have been so far in this game. So far in the first 10 minutes, normally the power 10 for England, they have had no attack, cleared their lines loads, and they're now missing kicks. And although 3-0 up on the board, England at this stage are rattled. And this is reinforced when just under 3 minutes later, we get to see a brilliant piece of play from the French. After another failed line-out happens for France, none of them panic and they reset. France don't do particularly well in line-outs throughout the whole game, but this is one that actually worked for them. England are on the back pedal, trying to get back on side before going to the classic English blitz defence. A well-worked defence setup for the formation set play France seemed to have adjusted into, until from nowhere, Jalibert throws a great dummy pass, causing Farrell and Slade to overrun their line, leaving a gap open for Jalibert to run, with only Jamie George to stop him, and from there it's just a simple offload to Julan to see France over for the first try of the match. There isn't a lot to analyse here, it's just great work from individual players and a great counter-attacking to the normally so brilliant English defence. One thing I did note during this try was in the background was the faint sound of the TMO Ben Whitehouse saying it was all good with him and that the try counts. I don't even know what would be looked at here for this try to count or not, but it's interesting to note that the TMO is looking for external factors that may render a try not legal. This will be incredibly important in part 2 when we cover the second half. But for now, Jalibert will complete the conversion, bringing France to a 7-3 lead in Twickenham. France don't play perfectly in this half by any means, and there is a number of mistakes in terms of the choices they make. This to me came from the inexperience of their team. In this first quarter especially, we saw an awful lot of the kicking very unnecessarily, just sort of kicking the ball deep into big counter-attacking players, maybe rather than trying to kick the ball dead. I'm not entirely sure why they did that, but I was so impressed to see in this first quarter how much they did attempt to play England head-on and really try to shake up their game plan. Our next referee discrepancy will come only a minute later from the try. An up and under for Johnny May to chase, making good ground when he runs straight into a France player that wasn't even facing him, diving to the ground that would make even Neymar blush. On the first look, you could be mistaken to believe the player is crossed in front of him, but Andrew Brace gives us as an immediate penalty with no second thought, without even having the TMO check it. We need to break this down and look at what actually happens here. Johnny May follows the kick up and begins his run. Dante does actually move across to mess up his run. You're not allowed to do this, but you will see this in almost every single game of rugby ever when someone goes for an up and under. But if Johnny May does actually run into Dante at this point, this is an actual penalty. You are not allowed to cross in front of the player to mess up their run, and Johnny May, in my opinion, should have run straight at Dante. However, Johnny May, being one of the fastest players in World Rugby, easily gets around Dante and proceeds to run straight into the shoulder of another French player, not even looking at Johnny May's line. This is not a penalty, but the ref gives it immediately because England are the better team, and why else would he fall? As I mentioned earlier, this idea of a tier 1 nation not making mistakes because they're the better team, I think plays a massive part in this game. My question here is, why does the TMO not intervene? There is a full minute between the penalty being given and the T coming onto the field. That is more than enough time after a try to check for any inconsistencies. Why not look at this and check it if it was an actual penalty? Why not overrule the ref? Put it on the big screen so you can have a closer look instead of the immediate penalty being given. This is made even worse by the fact that on the first replay of the footage before the kick is even taken, both of the commentary personnel agree Johnny May could have avoided that.
The others, Johnny May has done well in milking that. They have a penalty. Barrel's range, it will be in Daly's range.
And the decision could be overturned in that amount of time. That coupled with the fact that Johnny May runs face first into the French player, so obviously knew he was doing it. I mean, he literally headbutts a guy in the shoulder. He knew he was doing it on purpose and even celebrates with a low five after he manages to stand back up. And it's not often you get to see a professional dive in rugby, but Johnny May has absolutely mastered it. The next 5 minutes of the game was just kicking tennis with neither team putting it dead. There were a couple of times I feel France probably should have kicked it dead just to reset their line and get a bit of defence going again. To me, England were winning the kicking game as expected, but a friendly bounce for one of Julan's kicks sees France move yet again into the English 22. And after some more poorly executed lineouts from the French and some loose play, France finally managed to get a scrum that they get to put in. Just just on the outside of the English 22. England have already been dominant in the scrum through the Six Nations and through this Autumn Nations Cup, and have already won every single scrum in this game, or at least gained a penalty from it. France, for some reason in this game, always try and attempt to contend in the scrum, even though they seem to be getting absolutely dominated every single time, rather than just trying to get it out quickly and try and spread it wide to some faster players. I think this is something a youthful France squad could probably look at a little bit, trying to adapt to a game when certain areas of your game plan aren't working and see if there's a better way to work, and just conceding that some areas of your game plan aren't working and what would work better for you. In this game, scrums and lineouts were not very successful for France, and at this point they just simply need to try and simplify it down a little bit. Get the ball in and out from the set plays as soon as possible. In this scrum, however, France hold the ball in. Both front rows stand up, but the referee lets the scrum continue. Ben Youngs tactically moves around and hovers over the scrum half's leg in order to create a tackle as soon as the ball is picked up. Although completely legal to do this, I do think it's a little bit cheeky that you're able to just stand next to the scrum half, ready to tackle him as soon as possible. Maybe they should look at keeping scrum halves away. One of the big perpetrators for this would definitely have to be TJ Piranara. Is a menace for it in Southern Hemisphere rugby, just standing next to the opponent's scrum half in the scrum, sometimes even running around him to get to the ball first at the back of the scrum, which just feels outrageous that it can't give a penalty there, but what can you do? France's scrum half manages to get the ball out of the scrum, only for Sam Underhill to kick the ball straight out of his hands. An immediate penalty, and yet it isn't given. Look at where the referee is standing in relation to this happening. He is looking directly at the play and doesn't call a penalty. That, along with the assistant ref, who also has an incredibly clear view of the infringement and also doesn't cause a penalty. What is the point in touch judges if they don't see penalties the assistant referee has missed? The game plays on and Dante drops the ball in the tackle, with the ref immediately calling for a scrum. Luckily in this instant, Ben Whitehouse calls over the TMO and points out Underhill's infringement. One of the few positives to look at from a TMO point of view. Sadly, this will be the last time Ben Whitehouse will call out a penalty the ref has missed in this half. But keep in mind for the second part of the series that the TMO is able to call out a missed penalty from the referee. It will become important in terms of looking at just how poor the reffing was in this game. To me, this is a sign that the referee has also already given in to the idea that England are the better team. He already believes England are winning the scrums, and for the ball to be lost cannot be the fault of the strongest scrummagers. This, coupled with players shouting at him and putting doubt in his mind, the snowball effect of bad officiating is already growing. Jalibert successfully kicks the penalty and has a good goal-kicking game overall, to be honest, especially with how vital goal-kicking has become in this game especially. Into the final 10 of the first half, England begin the best of their attacks, creating 5 phases of attack before losing the ball forwards to France. This is a testament to just how well France have played in this half, keeping the much more experienced and much more dominant England team below 5 phases up to now. France kick the ball back downfield, and within 2 minutes we get to see another case of our running theme of poor refereeing. A good kick seeing space forces Watson to make a fantastic cover run to recover the ball, but a brilliant chase by Jalibert takes him by surprise and he is tackled to ground. In this collision, Watson loses control and drops the ball backwards. This is allowed as the ball hasn't gone forwards. However, Watson on the ground, still a tackled player, then proceeds to reach out, grab the ball and bring it back into the contact. Quite literally the definition of playing the ball on the ground. This is a penalty. I was so bemused by that this didn't actually get called out that I had to look up the rules of playing the ball on the ground just to see if there was a loophole that maybe I had missed. And no, Rule 7A states a tackled player can push the ball in any direction except forward. Watson grabs the ball from behind him and drags the ball forward on the ground, bringing it back into a tackle. This is a penalty. He also breaks Rule 7C, bringing the ball back into the tackle and lying on top of it, he prevents Jalibert from being able to take it. And to top it all off, Rule 8D, to not play the ball or attempt to tackle an opponent on the ground near a tackle. And even if all of those things are missed, Elliot Daly rucks over the ball and completely seals off the ball, lying literally horizontally over the ball. This is another penalty. Why are none of the 4 officials in this game picking up on this? What is being taught in World Rugby refereeing schools? 4 people and no one notices is absolutely shocking. All of these missed calls allow England a very safe and a very easy exit, and we are just left to wonder what on earth is happening with this officials team. In the 33rd minute of the game, we do actually get to see the referee make a correct call. Finally, we all screamed when this happened. Henry Slade with a high tackle, which he did hold his hands up to immediately, a good sign of professionalism to accept you've made a mistake. Slade tackles the scrum half, swinging arm, hitting the shoulder, and then riding up to the head. A clear penalty in Andrew Brace's mind. Except, wasn't this exactly what happened to Woki earlier in the first half? So why was that not a penalty? Why is there no consistency? This precedent has now been set, so surely we won't see any more of these missed high tackles, he says, foreshadowingly. We now get to see the lack of belief that this French side has in themselves, unfortunately. Over the next 3 minutes or so, France move up the pitch, applying more pressure to the English defence, and are looking pretty dominant, forcing England to give a penalty away in their own 22. At this point, I think France need to make a statement this close to half-time. They are moving forwards and they are causing England to break. They are applying all of the pressure and have all of the momentum. England are a substantial team who will come out in the second half with full force, and France will know England won't let them get into their half in the second half. To me, you have to kick for corner here and gamble on the maul for a try, and England are consistently giving penalties at the maul. Even a penalty try could be on the cards. Instead, Jalibert decides on taking the 3 just to keep that scoreboard ticking over. How costly could that be by the 80-minute marker? Inexperience in this French side kicks back in straight after the kickoff when France pass back inside their 22, only for Dulin to kick it out on the full. It's a fantastic clearing kick, however you can't kick out once the ball has been passed back into your 22. England move 50 metres back up the field into their best attacking position of the game just before half-time. This is rugby basics, and I would never imagine a player of any international standard should make such an error. He isn't even rushed, but for some reason kicks it out on the full anyway. The next 4 minutes are the longest 4 minutes of these young French players' lives. England set up the perfect lineup for the driving maul, which is what I was surprised at that they didn't actually go for, given how dominant their scrums have been and being able to move forward. A great offload and a surging run from Tom Curry nearly gets England the try. Over the next 4 minutes, England play 13 phases of crash ball and pick and drives attacking rugby. And I truly believe 9 out of 10 teams would concede a try to the amount of pressure England were putting on here. If you haven't seen it, I absolutely recommend going and finding the full clips of this segment just before halftime. I'll put some up on screen, but my words cannot do justice just how good this Shaun Edwards defensively drilled France team have been. England actually get over the line 3 times in 13 phases, and France push them back over the try line every time. It is truly astonishing defence, and not a reflection on England at all. England did everything they could, but the blue wall holds up. 13 phases of huge attack, and the ball gets dropped. Knock on, France survive, and we go in at half-time 13-6 up to France in Twickenham. Well, guys, we have made it. It is the end of the first half. And the key themes of this first half have been an inexperienced France side, showing their inexperience in terms of tactical kicking and passing when there were way better options available to them. On the other hand, they have shown great attacking motivation and scored a brilliant try. Individual skill coupled with pressure being able to be diffused has put them in the lead at half-time. Conversely, the World Cup final England team find themselves backpedaling, trying to recover against at best a C-class France team. The attack and kicking game plan isn't working at all for them, and they didn't really even have a mounting attack until the 38th minute of the game. The main theme of this game, of course, has been just how poor the reffing has been. Remember, of course, this is the best refereeing in the game. It is all downhill from here, which just feels ridiculous. But that will be in the second part of this two-part series. In the next one, I will cover the second half and that nail-biting sudden death portion of the game that we got to see at Twickenham. Sorry it's been such a long one here, guys. There was so much to talk about in this game. An exciting first half of rugby, but so many negatives that I didn't even see upon first viewing of this game. And it leaves me with the question, is this why rugby is struggling so much? People have already called this the most boring tournament ever, and with how much of the game relies on kicking and just winning penalties, I'm inclined to agree. I wonder if World Rugby will be able to work out a way of fixing the safe and boring rugby we experience now, especially in the Northern Hemisphere, a game of playing for penalties rather than attempting tries, a style of rugby where being in possession of the ball is almost a negative, as you are more likely to concede a penalty at the breakdown. Could this be fixed by dropping the value of a penalty to 2 or maybe even 1 point? Removing the focus on trying to win penalties. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. If you've enjoyed this longer podcast style breakdown video, guys, make sure you leave it a like. It takes a long time to make these sorts of videos, just reviewing the games and writing a bit of a script for me to talk about different points, and I appreciate the support you guys show. I didn't want to make like a massive 5-hour video, so I am going to break it down into 2 parts. If you want to see my analysis of the second half and that amazing sudden death final, make sure you subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with all of the videos as they finally come out. I hope you've all enjoyed today, guys. I will see you next time. Bye bye.